Percolate on a particular mix of odd and inspiring news headlines in Wendy's Coffee House. Newsmakers with a penchant for the unknown, unexplained, and unusual share their experiences with UFOs, ghost encounters, near-death experiences, and more for your own unique blend of Wendy's Coffee House Curious. And now, here's Wendy.
Oh, yeah. Celebrating World UFO Day. I heard the earlier show. They forgot that. It was like Paul Bunyan Day or something like that. But no World UFO Day. Nick Pope celebrating on Twitter. He's at Roswell, like the big Roswell festivals going on there. Unfortunately, I couldn't get away for that. I'm here. Working. But the good news is, guess what? World UFO Day, just in time, there was a sighting in Raytown. Okay, I was just looking to see if there was anything current, and a UFO stalker covers this. They cover it for MUFON. Anyway, the sighting, July 1st, about 4:30, between 4 and 4:30, said the person saw a teardrop-shaped bright light, similar to the color of a red light, or I'm sorry, an LED light. Duh. Oops, that could be wrong. It said it ejected a smaller orb of the same color. So the large teardrop UFO was moving right, then left, then right, shifting upward, and then it shot off out of just gone. The smaller orb was moving, he says, faster than any jet. And so trying to get a witness, but every time the person looked, the witness, he strained his back. He said he's elderly. Walked around the house, saw another object, again, moving away at a very fast speed. So it's hard to tell the way this is written without, really dissecting it, exactly what was seen. And he's combining it with another UFO sighting about 7 months ago. And this is up 29 south at the airport. So it's there's a lot in this. And then the other part, which sometimes people who see UFOs experience, he said he felt a burning sensation. So he used his cell phone, this is for the other one, to videotape his head. Not the UFO, because it was apparently too far away for the cell phone. But he videotaped the orb of light, and it's streaming to his scalp. That was when he was feeling the burning sensation. And then he captured the orb and pointed to where the orb left. Anyway, so yeah, this is perfect timing. Margie K tracks some of these things for Missouri MUFON. I talked with somebody else from the Kansas MUFON. There's just a lot more going on here than people hear about. The one thing that is turning about this is that they're getting more combined reports of UFOs with cryptoid type things that they have no way of explaining. And I can tell you in my own experience, the paranormal element is a big factor too. So this is just now getting a lot more interest and a lot more research and a lot more publicity. So if you're curious about that, check out the MUFON site. But yeah, World UFO Day. And there you can check out their site just to keep up on all things UFO-y. I really prefer watching the People of Earth. I think it's spot on. And yes, it's coming back July 24th. All is right with the world. Okay, now if it isn't all right with the world, then I'm going to go float. Floating KC, my favorite hangout. Well, it's one of the top favorites. Doesn't involve food. It's the zero gravity spa, and you go in and you just kind of chillax, relax. It's if you've never experienced this kind of thing, it's like meditating, only it gets you in that state quicker. Because once the first time, you're going to have to make a few adjustments. You're going to have to get used to the earplugs, the water, and the sensations that come with being in an unfamiliar setting. But about the 7th, 8th, 10th time, yeah, you just get in there, and it's so incredible. John Lilly, when he was studying dolphins, among other things, this is one of the things that he basically got everybody started with was the float tanks, sensory deprivation, and it is an amazing experience. So just if you're feeling stressed, need a break from all the UFO activity, and the paranormal stuff going on at your house, which some of us do, then go float. And then there's the other thing. It could go with you. Now, let's not go there. Anyway, Floating KC. And if you say you heard it on KCMO, they'll give you a 30% discount. Okay? That's like the fine print. If you don't say it, well, I don't know what's going to happen. But there. Wendy's Coffee House, the blog. This is the stuff that happens when you're into this kind of thing. I've had my own sightings, my own stuff has happened. But I've also noted once I began to talk about this and more people would share their own sightings. So as I'm doing a blog, a post about exorcism and exorcists, because there's a big increase in exorcists in the United States. And I had been researching this. I was looking it up in March, didn't have time to approach it because I was going to do a guest. I thought, what the heck, I'm just going to publish this stuff, get it out there so I'll start working and go a different direction with it. But so I'm working on this blog about the increase in exorcisms and exorcists specifically over the past 10 years. And I think this was in 2012, 2013 that they did the research on this. Over the past 10 years, the number of official priest exorcists has more than quadrupled. It went from 12 to 50. So that's in the U.S. So it's getting a lot more attention. And I was looking at some of the studies, the background, the research, and they were saying from some of these, and I can't remember if it was the Pew or Harris, or I can't remember what poll. I'd have to look it up again. Anyway, the thing I thought was interesting, that was more people believe in demons than they do ghosts. And you're more likely to have a ghost encounter than a demon, unless you watch TV, and they've got demons everywhere. They're like, whoa, all over. So that I thought was fascinating. And then as I was doing more research, the one I do want to get an interview with is the compassionate, the coroner, and I can't remember her name. Darn. Anyway, the compassionate coroner. And she talks about the sightings that or the experiences that people have just in terms of her clients who are deceased, the relatives, and then the situations involving all of that stuff in the coroner environment. That was fascinating too. So see, it's just all this stuff happening. And in the meantime, as I'm doing all that research and putting the blog together, I get somebody who tags me on Facebook and has a question. It says, I'm experiencing this paranormal stuff, and maybe you can help me with it. Okay, well, what's going on? And it's like a UFO paranormal combination, the whole 9 yards. And I'm just kind of, to me, it was an attachment from some of the work that's going on. And the kicker was when the person told me, well, it's okay. I'm not afraid. I'll deal with it. I called in an exorcist last time, so no problem. I'm like, of all the people who call me and connect at the time I'm working on this blog, is somebody who calls and said, oh, yeah, no problem. I'll take care of it myself. I called an exorcist last time. I thought, well, this isn't really probably not an exorcist situation, but obviously that has happened before. So a lot of stuff happening that we don't have any explanation for. Unknown, unexplained, and unproven, it can still make a dent in our reality. That's right. Okay, so coming up, something that's incredibly fantastic. Garnet Schulhauser, my guest. I've talked with him before, so that's helpful because I know a little bit of his backstory. Retired lawyer, and he had an up-close and personal encounter with a homeless guy. The homeless guy turns out to be a real guy and a spirit guide. We're going to come back. Garnet Schulhauser, and he's got 4 books out. We're going to talk about the books, his life, and how it changed when he met Albert, a spirit guide. Next on Wendy's Coffee House. Wendy's Coffee House. You don't have to drink coffee. It doesn't hurt. Tonight it's tea, okay? Just needed a little pick-me-up. Already had coffee most of the day, so kind of had to shift gears. Garnet Schulhauser is my guest. He has 4 books now. The latest just now coming out. But the first, Dancing on a Stamp, Dancing Forever with Spirit, Dance of Heavenly Bliss, and now Dance of Eternal Rapture. It's a whole lot of fun when Albert is your spirit guide. Hi, Garnet.
Hi, Wendy. How are you?
I'm doing good. And it's nice to know the story is continuing, that Garnet hasn't decided to take a vacation.
No, it still continues. Albert won't leave me alone. Someday maybe he'll let me retire, but so far I just have to follow his marching orders, Wendy.
Okay, now to get everybody up to speed, how did this start for you? Because this is this part of the story that's pretty fantastic.
Well, it happened in 2007 when I was still practicing law, Wendy, and I was walking down the street one sunny afternoon in May, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, a homeless man just jumped in front of me. And I'd seen these homeless people on the street often before, and my usual tactic was to just do a quick sidestep around them. But this guy was different. He had these dazzling, sparkling blue eyes that seemed to be penetrating deep within me, like I felt that he's looking right down to the depths of my soul. And at the same time, his gaze was sending me this wave of pure unconditional love. It was infusing my body with an amazing sense of peace and security and well-being. So I stood there like a deer caught in the headlights, just basking in the glow from this guy's gaze. And then he broke the spell by saying to me, "Why are you here?" And then he promptly disappeared into a nearby store. And when I finally collected my wits, I went into the store to find him, but he was nowhere to be seen. I walked back out on the street, walked up and down a several block radius trying to find him, but he had basically disappeared into thin air. So I resolved as I went back to my office that I would come back the very same time the next day and try to find him. And so I did. Next day, same time, same street. I walked up and down for maybe 15 or 20 minutes, about to lose hope, when I finally spotted him sitting on a bench all alone. And I walked up to him and I said, "Who are you, and why did you stop me the other day?" And he said, "I'm a soul just like you. I'm here to answer your questions and help you on your journey." So that was the beginning of a dialogue I had with this man that went on off and on for the next several months. He told me his name was Albert, and he was really one of my spirit guides in disguise. And so our conversation went on, as I said, for several months. He answered all the eternal questions of life and many others that popped into my mind. So it was a question and answer dialogue. And then at the very early part of the dialogue, he said to me, "I'm not just here to satisfy your curiosity. I want you to write a book about my revelations so they'll be available to everyone." So that resulted in my first book, Dancing on a Stamp.
Okay, now, so how often, how many times, what was the time that you saw him in physical form?
I saw him in physical form just for the first 3 times. So the first day in the street, and the second day in the street, and then one more time in my backyard when no one was around. Then after that, he was just a voice in my head, and we communicated by telepathy. And when I asked him, why did you appear to me as a homeless man initially, he said it was his way of easing me into the conversation. Because had he just started talking to me out of the blue as a voice in my head, I likely would have thought I was losing my mind. And he's right. So it was a good way of easing me into it. Interesting thing was he said that I was the only one who could see him in physical form. I saw him and touched him. And anybody else who had been passing by that bench that first day, they would have seen me sitting on the bench by myself, apparently talking to myself.
Yeah. Like, okay, good thing there were no witnesses who knew you. Yeah. Well, and see, I have a friend who has had an experience similar to that. It didn't go on. It was just like an instance where she went into a convenience store, and I'm just going to gloss over this. She went into a convenience store, and there's this person, just kind of pacing back and forth, throwing some kind of tantrum, and she's surprised because nobody else is giving the guy the time of day, and he's so out loud and boisterous that you can't miss him. And finally, he smiles at her, and he's gone. She realized he wasn't there. She was the only one who apparently could see him. And I think if I remember that right, she had asked what her spirit guide looked like, and all of a sudden that happened, and she put the two together and figured, oh, well, okay, fine. And that was, as far as I know. I didn't get any more follow-up on that story because I think she wanted him to come back. But that's the kind of thing that she was the only one who had the experience. And this is the stuff that I think people, they get challenged by, because for us, when this happens, it's real. There's no doubt, especially when he gave you 3 ways to see him in a physical form, to give you kind of, like he said, to ease you into it, to say this is real. Then you have to start figuring out how to go from there and maybe possibly eventually explain it to, close relatives, spouses, significant others.
Not easy, Wendy. It's not easy, but anyway,
yeah.
I did my best.
But that's it. That's the whole thing. And then the experiences, though, from there. So the first experience, dancing on the stamp, again, this is kind of giving you a real quick up close and personal tour of another facet of reality.
Yeah, absolutely was. It was a major transformation for me because before that, it was just a typical straight-laced, stuffed shirt corporate lawyer, and all of a sudden now this homeless man pops into my life. And, to be honest, before I met Albert, I looked at the homeless people with some disdain, like I was judgmental, and I often thought, why don't you guys go and get a job like the rest of us, So I was not very kind to homeless people, and all of a sudden this homeless man, Albert, comes into my life and changes my whole perspective on the whole thing.
Okay, and in terms of that, when you began to have that different perspective, there had to be other things going on too, lifestyle change. You're still, how quickly did you decide to retire, or was that already in the works anyway?
Well, I'd been thinking about retiring, but I retired about a year after I met Albert because, our conversation was going on. I didn't let to anyone that I was having a conversation with my spirit guides, not even my wife. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't know quite what to do with it. But I sort of kept notes of our conversation, and about sort of a year later, it just seemed to be irrelevant to continue practicing law. So I retired, and I then spent some time, writing the manuscript. And but even then, after I'd finished the manuscript, I sort of agonized over whether I'd get it published or not, because I knew I'd lose a lot of, my old friends, a lot of my law colleagues and clients would think that maybe I was losing my mind, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I was a bit concerned about it, their reaction. But after a while, I just said, to heck with it. I have to come out of the spiritual closet, publish this darn thing, and let the chips fall where they may. And so I did.
Okay. And then so what was that transition like?
Well, a lot of my former law colleagues and clients basically shunned me, just stopped communicating. They didn't say to my face that they thought I was crazy, but I suspect they were thinking that. So I did lose some friends, but I gained a whole lot more new friends of spiritual-minded people. So it's been a really rewarding transition, and I don't regret making that decision at all.
Well, you've done a lot of traveling, and you really have. You've put yourself in an entirely new community, a very supportive community, especially in Arkansas. I was, that whole, they do, I think, 2 different conventions there. One is more oriented towards spirituality. The other one gets into the UFO stuff. And it's a big, growing, continuing to expand community with Dolores Cannon. And her daughter now runs that, I think, right? Ozark.
Yeah, her daughter Julia does. Yeah, no, that I've been to the Transformation Conference. I've been speaking at it 3 times now, and it's really quite an amazing thing, because you have like 400 or 500 people of like-minded, spiritually enlightened people who are there, and it's really quite an energetic atmosphere. It's really it's really a good place to go and to attend or to speak, as I have, and I think next year I'll probably be back there again. But it's really quite an event.
Well, and you have some videos, just for people who are wanting to find out more on YouTube. There are some different interviews that you've done, and it's just, some of this stuff. It's pretty fantastic, because it's a stretch to think in this kind of reality that we have, when we're so used to everything being tangible and things being easily explained, to have an experience like you've had, and to have it ongoing, where you're getting a lot of information that you didn't know about before you started doing this.
Oh, you're absolutely right. In fact, before I met Albert, I didn't even know I had a spirit guide, or even what a spirit guide was. So I was pretty much way out of the loop on that. And so I've had a lot to learn. And Albert's been a great teacher, and he's been a great tour guide for me on my astral trips, and just an amazing amount of information out there. Like even all the stuff that I have learned and experienced is just the tip of the iceberg of what's out there, Wendy.
I want to start with where he began with that, the very first one, dancing on a stamp.
Okay.
What did
in terms of what he revealed to me?
Yeah. What did he try to break it to you gently in?
Well, he was just to consider my background. I was raised as a Roman Catholic, and so one of the things that sort of struck me was that most of his revelations flew in the face of much of what Christian holy men had been preaching for centuries. So it was kind of a 180-degree turn from what I was taught, even though I had rejected a lot of the beliefs that I was taught as a child. So he filled in a lot of the things that I was searching for, a lot of the gaps in terms of my paradigm of belief system. And the main thing was, like the eternal question that we always ask ourselves, like, who am I? Why am I here? Kind of thing. Well, he said, well, we're all eternal souls. Nothing new there for a lot of people. We're eternal souls whose home is on the spirit side, not on the physical plane where Earth is. And why do we come here? We came here to learn and experience things that we need for our evolution as souls, to experience sort of the physical reality, the physical plane on a first-hand basis. And so that's why we came here. No one made us come here. God or the source didn't say you have to go there. It was our choice entirely. And before we were born, we picked major aspects of our lives. We did life plan, where we picked the place where we'd be born, first language we'd learn, and the identity of our parents and siblings and friends and spouses and so on. We picked out sort of the major milestones that we hope to hit when we're born. The problem is, of course, is that once we're born, we forget that we have a life plan or where we came from, and we have free will to act. And so we're very often straying off course. And so it's not, our lives are not predestined in any way. I mean, once we get here, it's sort of a, use your free will, and who knows where you're going to end up. So that's why we're here. The other major thing, which really flew in the face of Christian doctrines, is that God or the source does not make rules for us to follow. So all this Christian teaching about, God made rules for you to follow, and if you break those rules, you're going to offend God, and if you don't make amends when you die, you're going to receive a judgment, and if you're really bad, you're going to go to hell. So that was sort of the way the Christian church had laid it out. Albert said that's nonsense. The source doesn't make rules for us to follow, doesn't care. There's no absolute right or wrong on what we do on earth in view of the source. So it doesn't make rules for us to follow. It doesn't manipulate events. And when we die, there is no judgment. The only judgment there is we judge ourselves when we do a life review. And there's no hell, there's no Satan. That's all just an invention by holy men to control people through fear and guilt.
Okay, now, people have experienced negative things. Does Albert address that when people have frightening experiences with this, like a near-death experience that actually involves a trip through hell?
Yeah, I did ask him about that. He says that everyone's near-death experience is sort of tailored to what the person should see in order to change their life when they wake up from their death experience and follow a better path on earth. So the people who said, I went through hell, well, there is no hell. That was just an illusion they created on the near-death experience because it was important for that person to see that particular image. Why? It varies with each person. But no, there is no hell. He's totally confirmed that. Everyone I've ever talked to on the spirit side confirms that as well. There is no hell. And the people who have had those experiences, that was supposed to teach them a particular lesson to help them in their life on earth.
A lot of people are going to be really disappointed.
Well, I'm not, because now I don't have to keep my asbestos suit in my closet for when I die.
Well, I just, it's like there's a big threat. So you've just taken it away. So now what? Okay, and then that's the question. I'm going to ask you a tough question here in the next break. I want you to, you have 4 books, okay?
Yeah.
And so some people don't always want to start at the beginning. So I'm going to ask you, of those books, to start, since they've now got 4, it would be different if you only had 1. But to start, what would be one of the most provocative and maybe influential bits of advice that Albert has unloaded? And which book would that be in? They don't have to read the whole thing, but I'm just asking for what of all that you have been given by Albert would be maybe the most mind-boggling, that convinced you that there is something a whole lot more to this. And thanks to Albert, we're getting a clue. Okay, so hang on. We got to take a break, do some news.
Sure.
And in the meantime, though, if you are listening, the show, my guest, Garnet Schulhauser, he has a website, garnetschulhauser.com. You can check out the books there. But a whole lot of information here from somebody that is non-corporeal, a spirit guide. But he was able to be physical and visible those first 3 times. Pretty fascinating stuff. So stick around. We're going to be back with more about Albert from Garnet. And this is Wendy's Coffee House. Taking a break for some tea. Lemon. Thank you for listening. Wendy's Coffee House, where we're curious. We like to ask questions and contemplate possible answers. But right now, we're talking with Garnet Schulhauser and really just kind of learning a little bit more about how the alternative to our world, that spirit plane, has a lot of, I think, mysterious stuff that we can check into, dive into, explore anytime 24/7. But if we're not doing that, then sometimes it just has a way of taking front and center stage and saying, here, get a load of me, which is what Albert did when he appeared as a homeless guy and then decided to shift gears and say, okay, this is what I really am. So you've got 4 books, and that's, I know this is a tough question. Well, maybe it isn't. Dancing on a Stamp, Dancing Forever with Spirit, Dance of Heavenly Bliss, and now the latest, Dance of Eternal Rapture. And I want to get into the part about the parallel Earth, but not yet, unless that's your favorite. Okay, so now, just take it for granted everybody's going to want to read all 4. What did you find of these experiences was really, I guess, challenging, and yet something that was reaffirming to you?
Yeah, that's difficult to pinpoint that one. There was most of the experiences were very fascinating. A lot of them were challenging in terms of my belief system, in terms of where I came from. And I had to sort of digest it and chew on it for a while to get there. One of the things that probably one of the more difficult things was when I had a visit on the spirit side with Jesus Christ and Adolf Hitler, and that was in Book 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so there I was, Albert's leading me along through the meadow, and these two guys are sitting there on a bench having a very friendly talk. And, I'm thinking to myself, what are these two polar opposites? One's a paragon of virtue, one was an evil monster. Why are they sort of sitting there and having a friendly chat? So it really, the following conversation really hit home to me, because what I learned was that, the soul who was Adolf Hitler, an evil monster, of course, he was really, on the spirit side, was a very handsome, compassionate, loving young man, spirit called Matthew. And he said, yes, he had his last incarnation on Earth as Adolf Hitler. And he said now, looking back in his life, of course, he's terribly sorry for all the horrific things that he did. But he said, that was just the reason that those things happened was because they weren't pre-planned, but because of my negative emotion just got out of control. He said I had planned to sort of get into politics there in Austria and Germany, but I didn't know where it would end up. And then sort of when he was born, and events just overtook him, and he was surrounded by other people who were as probably as evil as he was, and things just the way they went. And now he's looking back on that life saying, it was awful, it was horrible, but he wants to go back to Earth to make amends, to try again. And then the very interesting thing, and this is going to really disturb a lot of people, he said that since crossing over, he had met with the souls of basically most of the people who died in his death camps. And he said, there's total reconciliation. We love each other unconditionally, because when you cross over from the earth plane to the spirit side, there's no carryover of hatred or the desire for revenge. And so everyone, once they cross over, you're just all one loving, happy family, which is really hard for a lot of people to accept. That he could just sort of not have any problem meeting the souls of his victims. But that's the case, and that happens to everyone. I mean, if you're murdered here on Earth, when you cross over, you don't feel any animosity or hatred to the person who murdered you, because over there in the spirit side, we all recognize that things just happen on Earth, and sometimes they get out of control. But once you're on the spirit side, you're all loving souls who are all part of the source, and you recognize who you are.
Okay, now how does that relate to karma?
Well, I mean, karma, and of course, Hitler has accumulated accumulated a ton of negative karma. Yeah, and he's going to go back to try to change that. But karma is not something that negative karma doesn't compel you to come back. But souls take that as sort of like a moral imperative that if I've accumulated a lot of bad karma, I really feel I should. The proper thing to do is to go back and try to wipe out that negative karma, wipe my slate clean. So for a guy like Hitler, he's probably got to have a few lives to go, really good lives, to sort of make up for what he did. But he's okay with that. I mean, he was ready to. He was actually eager to go back and to try to wipe out some of that bad karma.
Now, the other thing that I think is fascinating, you have the mythical creatures that you include, a Sasquatch, an Irish fairy. Those elements are also in this as well.
Yes, and it was just after I had a conversation, I met the consciousness of Mother Earth Gaia, had a conversation with her, which was really quite interesting. And then, Albert says, well, there's lots of secrets on this planet that you're not even aware of. And so he said he'd show me a couple, and the first one was a Sasquatch in the Pacific Northwest of America, and there I met with a Sasquatch named Xana. She was about 9 feet tall, sort of like ape-like head and a muscular body covered in dark brown hair. And we communicated by telepathy. And she said, yes, Sasquatch had been living, alongside humans, but undetected for eons, all the continents except Antarctica. And the reason they don't want to have contact with humans is because they view us as to be violent and aggressive. And if they make contact, they're afraid that they'll be poked and prodded in somebody's lab or paraded around a circus as a freak. And they don't want that. And so they basically avoid us, and they live in underground cities. So it was really, she was lamenting the fact that the Sasquatch are very sensitive, intelligent creatures. They just want to live in peace and harmony with humans, but right now they don't think that's possible just because of the way humans are. And so they've been in hiding, will continue to be in hiding. They're very good at escaping detection because they have this, what she calls sort of like an animal-sensitive radar, and she can detect, using that, they can detect other animals and humans from many miles away, which is why they've been so adept at getting out of our way when we're coming through the forest.
I'm guessing at one of the events you probably met with Kiwani and Kelly Lapsaritis, but he was saying because they're interdimensional that's also a way for them to avoid detection.
Yeah, she didn't mention that to me, but that's certainly possible. But she did mention, of course, that they have this ability to detect humans, and so they can escape quite easily. And so they have been spotted occasionally, but for the most part, they're pretty adept at staying out of our way. And someday I hope that they can come out and join us freely on the surface of this beautiful planet, and that's only going to happen when humans change their ways.
Did you have the Irish Ferry, is that like the little people, or is it like...
Yeah, it's like the little people, and this was in Ireland, and she was, Albert brought her, we landed down in a meadow in Ireland, and Albert brought her up from behind a bush, and she was like 3 feet tall, beautiful little creature. She looked like a tiny, perfect China doll, and their story was similar to the Sasquatch, because the fairies there, the little people, used to live openly on Ireland, and then one day humans arrived. And at first they thought they were just bigger examples of themselves, and they welcomed us, but they soon found out, much to their chagrin, that we were violent and aggressive. And so then they just went into hiding because they're peace-loving, didn't want to get into fights and battles with humans, and they've been hiding in underground cities as well. They appear occasionally to humans, but they're very peace-loving creatures. They just want to live on the surface with us, but they can't do that again, just like the Sasquatch, because we're just a violent race. And so they yearn for the day that they can come out and live a frolic in the sunshine openly on the surface with us and not worry about being the subject of violent abuse.
Well, that goes into this other thing that you had a journey to the Earth in a parallel universe. Do these folks, these beings, exist in that area as well?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't run into them. My journey to the Earth in a parallel universe, it didn't. I didn't run into any of them. I don't know if they exist there or not. But that was one of the more fascinating trips I had with Albert. If you want me to describe what went on, I certainly can.
Absolutely, because that to me is one of the other things. That's like in book number 4.
That's in book number 4.
Okay, this is the carrot for book number 4. Ha 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 ha.
Yeah. So Albert took me to a parallel universe, and what happened was. We went. He ended up taking me sort of to Lower Manhattan, New York City, and I noticed that the World Trade Towers were still standing. And I said to Albert, like, what year is this? And he said, well, this is the same year as your Earth. And I said, why are these trade towers still standing? He said, a quirk of history on this planet. Way back when Mohammed, who of course founded Islam, he actually died in a freak accident when he was very young. And so Islam was never formed, and there is no Islam in that parallel universe. So all the Middle Eastern countries, they're not Muslim; they're actually mainly Christian. And so that means that there was no Crusades because there was no Holy Land to liberate. There's no civil war in Syria, and there are no Islamic terrorists. That's why the World Trade Towers are still standing, because there was no Islamic terrorists. So it was quite a different sort of planet from ours, just because of that one quirk of nature.
Well, would they have had any other strife that could have been? I'm guessing it still has the same kind of challenges, or am I? Was it?
Yeah, I think there's still some challenges, but that's one challenge they don't have to overcome, and they don't have to. There's no conflict in the Middle East, and there's no terrorists, as I mentioned. But they have, I guess, most of the other challenges. The other thing that was very significant about that was that he then, from Lower Manhattan, he then dropped me down into the middle of what is now Harlem in New York City, and he dropped me down a busy street, and he said, do you notice anything different? I'm looking at people going by, and all of a sudden he hit me. There were no black people, or just, the odd one here and there. It's mostly white people. And I said, where are the black people? And he said, another quirk of history in this planet. Way back in the mid-1600s, Great Britain decided to abolish slavery, and then the other European countries followed suit. And so because of that, there was no slave trade from Africa to southern U.S. There was no slaves in the U.S. There was no Civil War. Abraham Lincoln didn't have to abolish slavery because it had been abolished long before. And because of that, the black population of the U.S. is roughly like 1% just from normal course immigration, rather than 13% of what it is. So Martin Luther King never existed. There was no civil rights movement. It wasn't necessary. So another very significant difference in that parallel Earth, just because of that other quirk in their history. So, I'm sure that Earth, I didn't explore it extensively. I'm sure they have their own problems, but there was two very significant differences from our current Earth.
What was the point he was trying to make?
He was trying to make is that, there are different parallel universes. He says there's many different ones. And what happens is that when the universe sort of divides, it's like cell mitosis. It sort of divides randomly, and Earth has sort of divided the universe we're in, many times over the course of it. And sometimes, if you just had a recent division, things are very, very similar. If it was divided a long time ago, then things can be quite different. And he's just trying to say, look at the way things happen on Earth. That's not the only way to skin the cat. There are other people who have done things differently. And he wasn't making any value judgment. He wasn't saying that's a better Earth than the one we're in. He's just saying, look, it's different, and there's a bunch of different Earths out there as well. And someday I hope to get a chance to explore them, but this one was really quite eye-opening.
Okay, we're going to have to take another break, but I do want to get into that. The other travels that you've had with Albert, because you did go to other planets and saw other civilizations. So if we can come back and address that, are you up for that?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. We're talking with Garnet Schulhauser and about his travels with his spirit guide, Albert. Fascinating story. Stick around. Wendy's Coffee House. Wendy's Coffee House. Garnet Schulhauser took a tour of several, worlds, dimensions, times, hearing that planet the Crusades didn't exist. They had Christianity, but without the Crusades. That's a kinder Christian. I mean, they didn't have all that trauma. There might have been something else. But so this is what you're experiencing with Albert, and it's it has to be blowing your mind, some of these experiences, and knowing that you have to get up the next day at some point and dive back into the 9 to 5 and possibly talk with your wife and say, well, guess what, it was an interesting night, I'm back.
Yeah, exactly. It is really tough sometimes to come back from those trips with Albert to sort of the day-to-day grind on our planet, but the good thing that I realize is that there are other realities out there, other planets, other dimensions. There's all the good stuff on the spirit side, and so I know that someday I'm going to be able to access that, when my physical body dies. So that sort of makes the prospect of a physical death a lot more, less troubling to me than it was before. And so I know I'm going to get back there. But in the meantime, I have my job is to spread Albert's message. So that's my role in this life right now.
I think a lot of people would like to have your retirement plan.
Yeah, the line forms on the left.
Well, it's my gosh, the travel that you do, and it's like a free ride. You don't have to worry about basically the downtime, recovering from the flight or any kind of the bad food element. The potential for bringing back a bug you didn't want to end up with.
There's no security checks. There's no cramped seating. Yeah, it's a great way to go.
Okay, so the thing is, though, when you're traveling and you got to see at one point, I think this was in the second book or so, you're visiting human civilization that made the shift to the new Earth. Is that where that was? Is that a? Yeah,
that was in book 2.
Okay, so what was?
That was really an interesting trip because a lot of people have been talking about the new Earth and 5D dimension and so on. It was after Albert had showed me a lot of abuse that was going on our planet, human abuse of animals and other humans and so on. He said, well, there is a light at the end of the tunnel because you can ascend to the new Earth if you just raise your vibrations, expand your consciousness. You can go there, and lots of humans from our planet have already done that. So he took me to the new Earth, which is just our planet in a higher dimension. And there was just an idyllic society. I mean, the people there, they didn't have a lot of fancy technology, but there was no crime, there was no negative emotions, there was no violence. They didn't need to work, there was no money. Everything was supplied to them by the state. I met with some descendants of a civilization that had lived on our planet many years ago in Central America, and they were sort of a peaceful sort of tribe. And then when they discovered a barbaric tribe from another country was encroaching on their territory, they didn't know what to do because they had no weapons and they didn't want to fight. So they ended up, their leaders orchestrated a mass ascension basically through a deep meditation. They all just basically raised their vibrations and ascended to the new Earth. So the people I met with were their descendants, and it was it was just a great society. They had basically learned to ward off all diseases and repair injured tissue. They learned how to slow down the aging process, so they all lived for a couple of hundred years, and they were free to pursue, artistic, recreational endeavors, increased their knowledge, and it was just a very nice society. And that's sort of a place that we can all get to, Wendy, if we just raise our vibrations to match the vibrations of that new Earth.
So if I'm eating out at Pizza Hut and I disappear, I might have gone somewhere like that?
Absolutely, yes. You could be there, yeah.
Well, maybe Starbucks. Yeah, I just someplace.
Yeah, the thing is that people have done it, and some people just sort of disappear. And I actually ran into, in one of my astral trips, a soul who had basically done that. She was in a really bad state because her husband and children had been killed in a car accident by a drunk driver, and she was very bitter. She ended up being very depressed, and she's thinking about suicide. Finally, somebody said, "Well, why don't you go to an ashram in India and learn to meditate? Maybe that'll help you." And she did learn deep meditation. And then she said one day she was in the garden meditating, and just zip, away she went, and she ended up on a new Earth. So it does happen.
Yeah.
And people can go in groups or they can go individually, but it's not. I mean, it's easier said than done. You have to get your vibrations raised up, which is by embracing love and compassion.
I have actually talked with a guy who had a huge life-changing experience. His name is Dr. House, and he's not the Dr. House TV guy. He's the Dr. Nice Dr. House. Anyway, Meyer Baba, he started studying his teachings and went to 3 ashrams and does this incredibly deep meditation, and in so many ways changed his life. For one thing, it was a miracle he survived. His liver was shot, and the deal was they healed him on the 4th dimension and put him back and said, "Now you're going to do the rest of your life. This is you work. God said you work for me." He says, "Well, okay, I'm good with that." Mm-hmm. And then the journey began. But that's the kind of stuff when you're talking the deep meditation and connecting with that particular element and that kind of meditation. It's real, and people, when they experience it, there's no coming back. Their life changes, and they become different humans entirely. So that's part of that is with you. Did you change your diet? Have you changed your way of dealing with people? What for you with Albert has changed?
Well, I certainly changed the way I look at people. I recognize now that sort of everyone I see, walking on the street or in the shopping mall, they're all souls having a human journey. They're all just like me, different journeys, different places they're going to, and all souls are connected to each other and to the source. So we're really all sort of part of the one, the totality of the universe. So I look at people differently. I try not to be judgmental. I was before. Now I sort of look at when somebody does something that I don't agree with. I say, okay, I don't know where they've been. I don't know where they're going. I don't know what challenges they face, so I'll have to just accept it and treat that as sort of a lesson in my life. So I treat people much differently. In terms of my diet, Albert has said, if you want to, the quick route to raising your vibrations is to become a vegetarian, because meat, animal flesh slows down your increase in the vibratory rates. So I haven't been very good at following that, but that's certainly a goal I have for myself. But that's one way of sort of speeding up the process. But the biggest way is just to fully embrace love and compassion and discard negative emotions, because every time you have a flare-up of anger or hatred, if somebody does something to disturb you, the flash of anger that you feel, that just drops you back down in terms of your vibratory level. So it's easy in concept to say this is what I'm going to do. Very hard to do in practice, because we all run into these things every day in our lives.
Yeah, and you're talking about people who are going to work to and fro and having all sorts of issues with just the emotions of being stuck in traffic and having to figure out how to vent without harming anybody. We live in a very high stressful environment for those of us who live in major cities, and that's, I think, changing in many ways the way that we look at people and deal with people in a negative way. And that this is the challenge, is to turn it around and say, well, what else can I focus on to get me out of that moment of being irritated that I can't get home in time to make dinner, or pick the kids up from school, that kind of thing.
No, absolutely. It happens all the time. And when I was practicing law, I'd be the first one when somebody cut me off in traffic to want to flip them the bird, and I'd be angry at it, and I'd still be angry 2 hours later, And now I've changed. I mean, I have the initial impulse to say, you shouldn't have cut me off, but then I just sort of calm down and think of something positive and try not to get upset. It actually does work if you focus on it, Wendy. It's just not easy, but yeah. you can get there if you work at it.
Yeah, that's why I advocate the floating KC that I talked about earlier, and meditation and those kinds of things, being out in nature, going for a walk, walking the dog. listening to other people tell stories who have had these incredible encounters. That's another way of saying, oh my gosh, there's so much out here. Just like your story is giving people a different perspective. And you don't have to, have this to experience it and believe it hook, line, and sinker. It's a thing that says, well, what if? What if this were to happen? And what about the stories that you bring back from your travels? How did your wife, because this is a big stretch, the lifestyle that you led before this, which is very, the typical corporate type lawyer situation. And then you go into this, which is, a pretty about face.
Yeah, she was actually very accepting of it. And I sort of just let her know in bits and pieces, like, first of all, I said, I'm writing a book. And she said, oh, okay. And what's it about? Well, a homeless man. And then a little bit later, I let on that he was actually a spirit guide. And so I sort of fed it to her in small bits, and she was quite accepting. She's a very spiritual person herself, Wendy. She's had spiritual encounters with her mother just after she died, and with her father just after he died. So she's quite in tune with the fact that there's another reality there beyond in the spirit realm, and that when people here die, that's where they go. So she's pretty accepting of that.
Well, she was saying, well, there's hope for you after all, huh?
yeah, exactly.
Oh, finally, he's turned a new leaf.
Taken a long time, but I finally got there.
Well, Albert decided, you were due. Okay, you were due, and she needed a break, so there you go. Ha ha.
Exactly, yeah. He came along just in the nick of time.
Okay, now there's some videos. I saw one recently, a UFO, I can't remember the name of the guy who does this. Anyway, it was from when you were at the latest, I think, Transformation conference there, and it looks like a real well-produced interview with you for video. We're going to have to get out of here, but for anyone who's listening, Garnet, you've got a great story. I'm hoping book 5, 6, and 7 are on the way, but I'm going to just sign off and say don't stop. Albert has some wonderful insight, and it's nice that you're going along for the ride.
Thank you, Wendy.
And if you're listening, I'll go ahead and make a post here the next 24 hours or so with the update on the website for Garnet, also his books, and I'll include the video too so you can get a peek at that. But this stuff is just challenging us to think in new ways and open up our mind to what the potentials are for our own consciousness when we make these incredible exploring journeys into the unknown. And bring back a few spirit guides or two. Thank you to Albert and Garnet Schulhauser. Till next time, stay curious, and thank you for listening. Wendy's Coffee House. See ya.